All right, everybody, let's get settled in. And if we can get our speakers up here to the front. While we're waiting, I just wanted to welcome everybody and thank you guys very much for coming. We are the Conversation Coalition, and to tell you a little bit about what we do, we intentionally bring together people with different worldviews to have the conversations that most people avoid. You'll often hear me say that if I'm in a room where everybody is in agreement, I get kind of bored rather quickly. And it's been really exciting doing these events and hearing all the different opinions and meeting a lot of different people. We've been doing this now for 2 years, so we just passed our 2-year anniversary. So again, thank you for coming. Thank you. And also, we have a special event. We usually do these on the last Thursday of every month. And next week, we have a special event. It's a little bit different than our normal events, and so we kind of crammed it in there in the middle. Normally, we have believers and non-believers getting up here and sharing their different perspectives on things. Next week, we're going to have an all-believer panel, but they're going to be still different perspectives. You're going to have some more progressive believers and some more conservative believers. And so next week's event is, okay, who are the real Christians? Who are the true Christians? So yeah, I can't wait for that one.
Christians. Requested by the Christians. Just want to say that.
Yeah. I didn't go seek that one out. They brought it up, and I said, hey, we can do it. I want to tell you guys a little personal story. Some of you guys in here, the first time that you ever met me, I was wearing this green polo, and it was at some of the Panera meetups when we would do them down there. I wore this on purpose so that I could stand out, and if you walked into Panera, you would know I'm looking for the guy in the bright green polo. And normally my wife helps me put together my outfits, but she wasn't home this afternoon when I was getting ready, and so I chose myself. And as I was sitting there in the closet, I thought, we've been doing this now for 2 years. There's my green polo. I think I'm going to pull that. And so when I looked at it, I wore that because I wanted to stand out. And I want that to be an encouragement to you guys to, after you see how these things are done and how people share their opinions, and even though they might disagree, if you can, you also be that one that stands out in your friend group or in your family. Be that one that stands out and says, no, I'm happy for the conversations. We can disagree, but that doesn't mean that we can't be friends, we can't be family, So if you get a chance, also be the one to stand out. So we've got a great conversation tonight, and so I will turn it over to Elliot, our moderator tonight, and he'll let you know what's going on.
Well, thank you again, everybody, for being here. If this is your first event, I just want to let you know, you have picked the most happy, fun, and exciting topic to show up on for your first event. So we're going to be talking about all the great things in life, death, grief, suffering, all that fun stuff. No, seriously, actually, we have done this topic a couple of times in the 2 years that we have had these events, and every single time we have this, it does seem to really strike a chord with people. And I think one of the biggest reasons is because however you were raised, whatever you currently believe, this is something that affects every single one of us, just across the board. So I'm very, very excited. I know this is going to be a really cool conversation. We have a bunch of awesome people up here. And just so you guys know, this is probably the majority of time that you're going to have to listen to me, which I know you're all thrilled about. My goal is to get these 4 wonderful people talking amongst themselves, and I'm just going to kind of hang back for the majority. But to start off, I want to have everybody introduce themselves so you know who you're talking to today. And we'll just start out here, and we'll just go right on down.
My name's Sarah. Is it on? Did it turn off? Hello. Hi. So my name's Sarah. I guess I'll give a little bit of background of my journey through faith and beyond. So I grew up Southern Baptist. I was baptized when I was 8 years old. My family stayed at a Southern Baptist church till I was 12. Then we moved to a non-denominational mega church. Stayed there till I was about 24, got married, went back to Southern Baptist, but I was a reformer, so 5-point Calvinism. And then when I was about 27, I went through a deconstruction journey, and that was about 8 years ago. And yeah, here I am. I'm an atheist. Ooh, scary. So that's kind of my story.
That's awesome. All right, is mine working? Yay. Okay. Quick note, I do a pretend podcast with a friend, and we put it on the internet for the darkest corner, and it's like not a big deal. But our first topic, we were like, what should we talk about? And we decided to talk about death. So I guess just like, love the dark matter. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer. I met Gary through one of the Panera meetups he did about a year ago and started following along. And so I'm so excited to be here. I love this kind of conversation, no matter like where you are from as an orientation. I think it's honestly the nerd I am. Like, I think it's fun to have this kind of conversation. So looking forward to tonight. So my quick story is I also was born and raised Southern Baptist in Texas. Very, very, very committed, like eldest daughter vibes, like we'll do it all to perfection, and did that all through high school, youth group, college, went to a seminary and got a master's degree in marriage and family counseling from a Southern Baptist seminary, got married, had 4 kids, and when I was about 32, all of the building cognitive dissonance of multiple layers of questions that were not answered and information I was getting and ethical dilemmas and all of these things kind of collided in one big crash. And I had a moment standing in my messy kitchen, and I thought to myself, like, I do not believe this anymore. And that catapulted me on kind of a 10-year journey of like making sense of that, kind of trauma recovery, because it was a very traumatic thing. It wasn't something I intended to have happen to me. I'm doing much better. Until last year, I was doing a routine doctor's visit, and my blood work was a little off. And long story short, I got diagnosed at 42 with a type of blood cancer called multiple myeloma, and it is treatable but not curable. So kind of a bummer of a life experience. I actually had a stem cell transplant this summer. Whole ordeal. I'm doing well. Like, I am still immunocompromised and recovering, and I'll be in treatment. But when I saw that this was the topic, considering like my life experience, I was like, Gary, please, can I have a microphone? Like, I would love to reflect out loud on my perspective on this as I've actually faced death. I thought I was going to die last November. I was really sick, and I still will, as we all, but it's much more in my face because I'm looking at prognosis curves and cancer treatments. So just glad to be here. Thanks.
Thank you both so much, yeah. And to our believers now, I know you're a familiar face for some people around here, but...
Yeah, I'm so glad you're doing better.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So my name's Jeff. I am a United Methodist clergy person. I'm an elder in the United Methodist Church. I'm the lead pastor of a church that you're sitting in. Real quick background also, yeah. So, okay, I did not grow up Southern Baptist. Yeah. So I grew up in a little denomination called the Christian Reformed Church, which if you're not Dutch, you don't get to go. That's kind of how it is. And at about 16 years old, I was going into my junior year of high school. My parents thought it would be a great idea to move me into a Christian high school. And it actually had the complete opposite effect on me. And I spent the next, 18 years as a self-proclaimed agnostic. I could never bring myself to actually say the words, "There is no God." But I was pretty sure that if there was a God, it was the divine clockmaker that just made things and then disappeared and just let it run. So maybe deist would have been a good way of describing me, like a lot of our founding fathers. And then through a series of events, I came back around to actually looking at what Jesus had to say. And I realized that I was really, really intrigued by Jesus. And so I wanted to learn more about God. So I decided that I needed to figure out, where can I learn about God? So I started going to church. And I realized you don't really get a good opportunity in most churches to learn about God. What you get is to go through curriculum and have these conversations that all you got to do is fill out the answers. That's not what I was looking for. I was looking for, I want to know, I really want to know why. And so I decided that probably the thing that people do when they want to learn about God is they go to seminary. That's how I ended up in seminary. Never wanted to be a pastor. Because at the time I had a very strong opinion about church people, and it wasn't a positive opinion about church people. And so I went to a seminary and I did a ton of research. I didn't. What I did is I looked up where could I go, still have a full-time job, and I could do most of my learning online. This was in 2007? No, it was before that. Anyway, I forget how old I am sometimes. So I'm trying to make this short. I ended up going to seminary, and I chose it because I could do a lot of it online and then only have to go up during the summers. I didn't pay any attention to the theological bent on any of that. I figured they were all about the same. Boy, was I wrong. And then it was interesting because here I am trying to be a good person of faith. I'm calling myself a Christian again, and I'm told in seminary that I'm not a Christian, which that was interesting. And then, so then I decided, at this point I got a job in the United Methodist Church because it was a place that I could go, I could have a job and still go to school. You know, they gave me money to do it, and I was like, sweet, this works out well. And they gave me time to do it. I could sit in my office and do my schoolwork. And so I did that. But because I was in the United Methodist system at this point, I also still had to jump through all of the things in order to continue to be able to have my job. And so I didn't realize at the time that I was working towards ordination. I didn't know. I didn't know the polity. I wasn't Methodist. I had spent a little bit of time as a teenager in the United Methodist Church. But anyway, so my goal was to become a philosophy teacher or a theology teacher at university to go on and get a PhD. And then one day I got commissioned, and then 3 years later I was ordained, and I decided I was doing pretty good at it. And so I had kids, and I figured I didn't want to spend another $100,000 plus to get a PhD, so I stopped, and I'm a minister. So there you go. How's that for a call story?
I was going to say, us United Methodists don't often have really profound call stories. You know, it sneaks up on us. My name's Reverend Brandon Baxter. I am also an elder in the United Methodist Church. The plan was not to have two United Methodists on this panel tonight, but one of our other panelists couldn't be here, so I'm chipping in here. So hopefully we don't duplicate each other too much tonight. Although I don't know, I've never talked with death and suffering about you. We may disagree greatly. But anyway, I am different than all of these stories. I am a cradle United Methodist. So I was born and raised in a United Methodist family. In fact, I was out doing at somebody's funeral recently, and it was at the Hermitage Funeral Home, and that's where all my grandparents on my maternal side are buried, and my grandparents and great-grandparents, and I had not been to their tombs in a while, and I went up to look at their gravestones, and they actually had the Methodist cross and flame on them. I was like, boy, I come by this strongly. They had that on there. That's the one image they had on their tombstone. But as somebody that was raised in the United Methodist faith, I was also raised by parents that were very open theologically. And so my parents always encouraged questions, always encouraged doubt. In fact, I remember going through confirmation in the United Methodist Church. A lot of times people will be baptized as an infant, and so then you go through confirmation later to decide if you want to join the church. And that often happens around 6th, 7th, 8th grade. I actually was not baptized as an infant, though, so I got baptized right before my confirmation. But I remember my mom saying very clearly to me, I was asking her some questions. I was like, I don't know if I believe this. I don't know how I feel about this. And she very clearly said to me, you do not have to join the church if you don't want to. You know, this is your choice. So I was not raised in a coercive Christian background. And yet I struggled a lot with my tradition that I came through, even though I identified with it a lot. There are a lot of things about the United Methodist way of thinking about God and Christianity that I loved. And then there were things about the polity that I still hated. I hated our exclusion of LGBTQ persons. There were other things I wrestled with in the church. I didn't like everything about the way we were structured politically. And I had to think through my 20s and 30s whether I wanted to stay United Methodist or not, because I was starting to feel a call more towards ministry. I started working in youth ministry in a church. And I was like, do I stay United Methodist or not? And I also wrestled with, am I really a Christian or not? It's going to be interesting to talk next week, because I started to question maybe the kind of Christianity I was raised with wasn't Christianity at all. And maybe the fundamentalists have it right. And so I just need to throw out my bankrupt half-Christianity. But I came full circle on that. And I came to peace with both my faith and my place in the church. And so I am a minister today and trying to do my best at that.
Well, thank you guys as well. I'm very excited because I don't think either of you exactly touched on it, but let me just say nice things about you real quick. Both of you have like psychology backgrounds, so there is a reason you're up here today. You have some handling of grief and suffering, as do both of you, obviously, being in the ministry. I think historically speaking, we have a lot of precedent for, religious attitudes and religious practices being very commonplace whenever we find ourselves grieving or suffering or dealing with death. So my job, again, as the moderator, is to try to make sure that we stay on topic, and if these guys start fighting with each other, I got to pull them back. See, the thing is, though, if they're not fighting with each other, I got to make them fight a little bit. So I'm gonna throw this out real quick, and whoever wants to take it, is faith required, or a religious mindset required, to properly deal with grief and suffering as people?
No.
All right, expand on that.
Can you say the question again? Because my first response was, I don't think so.
Yeah, is faith or a religious mindset required for properly handling grief and suffering as a person?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. And I think that, especially the way that you worded the question, I appreciate the way you worded the question, because originally it was like, who does it better? And I have all kinds of questions about what does better mean. So a person of faith or faith, it's such a wide variety of the way that we even deal with suffering and death that I don't think that you could say that it's necessary in order to deal with it. Because there's some persons of faith who very much believe that when you die, that's it. And then there are some people that believe that when you die, you're going to inherit a mansion, and there's going to be streets of gold. And I remember growing up with how wonderful it's going to be because we're all going to get to worship all day long. And I thought to myself, are you describing heaven or hell? Because the thought of singing hymns all day long, every day, again, remember the tradition I grew up in, it was hell sitting through worship. And so I couldn't imagine what that would look like. And so so my initial answer would be, I don't think so.
Anybody else?
You are not fundamentalist enough to have this conversation be interesting. Because my religious inheritance would have been in a group of people that would have said yes. And so taking the microphone to answer the hypothetical yes, I will say, I am not here to take away or talk anyone out of a meaning-making system that helps them in a time of deep suffering. As it, like you said, like I do therapy for people. Neutrality and understanding that people have their own sense of coping resources, and I feel like it's counter loving to take something away from someone who is suffering, especially in that moment. But if we can zoom out, I feel like there are some religious assumptions that are made, maybe not by you, but I think by the religious, like some other religious groups, that there is no way to experience death and suffering without a faith orientation. And if anything, my intention tonight is to say there are lots of ways to approach death and suffering, in addition to having a meaning-making system that is based on a supernatural belief. And I feel that in the past year, having to kind of have to get really honest with can I really say that that's true? Because there's also been kind of like a flavor of like, well, we'll call your bluff when you're really sick or when someone's really dying. Sitting in the doctor's office being told hard things, and just to say, like, it's not the case that every person's going to surrender to a divine idea or construct because they face death. But I can't really argue with you if you're not going to say that's true.
Don't worry, I'm going to get you guys fighting.
Okay.
Well,
yeah, please.
Well, first of all, I mean, personally, I would answer somewhat like Jeff, but I'm gonna try to speak from that other side of Christian thought too, to kind of help us think what that might be like, and why I would still say that doesn't always work very well. But first of all, I want to affirm one of the things you said, which was not taking the tools away from people when they're suffering. One of the things that I think about a lot, as somebody that has to preside over lots of funerals and memorial services, is a lot of times I deal with people that bring their own assumptions about heaven, hell, God, all of these things that I may not even personally agree with. I may have done more theological work and thought about this in a different way than they do, where I may just have a fundamental difference in understanding that. And yet, I will do my best to preach and operate within their theological system. Now, I will not say things that I do not think are true, but I will pull out the things that I feel like hint at truth, even within their way of being. And I think that's so important, because the worst thing you can do is either take away those tools or try to coerce somebody into having a certain set of tools. Like, for instance, I have heard people before get up and religious leaders get up and make very bold statements in, let's say, the untimely death of a child, and try to say, this happened for a reason because, right? Or God intended to take this child for another angel in heaven. That makes me want to vomit. And yet, I also have to understand that there are some people that comforts. And that's hard. And that's where I'm going to speak into that, why I still think, now, somebody that would say yes to this question, their first reason for saying yes would be that they would believe that a person that does not claim to believe, especially if it's a Christian, I can only speak as a Christian, but as a Christian, they would say somebody that does not say yes cannot trust that they will be saved after they die. And so it feels very, and we were talking about this in the parking lot, it may feel very unloving to them not to say to you, you need to accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, because you need to be guaranteed that you will be saved when you die. Now, that's not my notion of salvation through God, but that is a way to think about that. The problem is, even with that, I mean, I guess on the ethereal level, I guess whether that makes you feel crappy or not, if you accept it from their point of view, then you're saved. So that's the best outcome. But on a practical living level, I have seen that work both ways for people as a tool. There are some people that truly does bring comfort to. that they believe that they will be saved because of their particular assent to faith in Jesus Christ. And so they have this kind of assurance through that. But I've also seen people that up until the moment they die, they are terrified that they're going to hell. Or they're beating themselves up trying to figure this out. And then it becomes a damaging tool. I thought it was very interesting the other day. Our president was wrestling with this question out loud. Did you all hear that? He was questioning, am I good enough to go to heaven? And he said, I hope if I just can help bring peace between Ukraine and Russia that maybe I'll get to go. You know? It's kind of this earning your way into heaven. That's not the way I think about salvation. But if you think that way, for some people that brings great comfort, but for others it brings existential dread.
Yeah, I mean, I have experienced grief and loss as both a non-believer and a believer. So I guess, I mean, I would just be echoing some of the ideas that have already been said. But to put it shortly, like, yeah, like I'm living proof that you don't have to have a belief in God to get through hard things. I mean, I would say I even have coped better as a non-believer than I did as a believer. So
Could you talk about that? What do you mean by coping better as a non-believer?
Well, so in my early to mid 20s, I had kind of a mental health crisis, and I ended up having a lot of panic attacks, which is, if you've ever had one, it's kind of like you're afraid that you're going to die. I mean, it's really intense, like visceral fight or flight reaction, and you go to the hospital and you're like, I'm having a heart attack, and they're like, no, you're okay, like, you're just having a panic attack. And that happened a lots of times over the course of a couple of years. And even though I was a believer, I did not have that assurance. I was afraid of the unknown, and now I just think about the time before I was born, and it's like death is like that. It's like, are you afraid of the time before you were born? Well, no. So it doesn't really scare me anymore.
So one thing it sounded like everybody was kind of touching on here, and I'm going to kind of throw it at you guys, kind of poke at you just a bit here, because again, I got to get them fighting a little bit, It sounds like sometimes there's some bad stuff that happens when we mix death or suffering and religion. Like, is that true? Is there harmful things that happen from religion, and what do we do about those? If there's all of these Christians out there that are telling people, your child was picked for God's garden, just another angel I mean, if that's harmful, what do we do as believers, as non-believers, just as people?
It doesn't matter to me. Do you have a direction you want to go on that? Something speaking to you?
Well, I think you touched on it, because it was something I've been thinking about. I've been thinking about, like, what does it mean to do it better? Yeah. And I think that it's often done really poorly with my faith tradition, in that so much of the entire, it seems to me, right, I can only speak from my own perspective and my own experiences, but it seems to me that my own tradition, the Christian faith, puts so much emphasis on what happens after death, that death itself becomes this extreme point of anxiety. And I've seen too many times family members come up to me and say, is so-and-so going to be in heaven? Because I never saw them go to the altar. Like, oh my gosh. Or, are they going to be okay? I remember they didn't go to church, and there's just so much anxiety that comes with it. And yes, and there's so much what I would call bad theology when it comes to things like trying to make sense, right? Because we have, like, how am I trying to say this? If your theology is all about, if your faith is all about what happens after you die, then you have to try to find a way to become comfortable with something that you're uncomfortable with. instead of just acknowledging that you don't really know, and that. So I also just want to preface, I think that Christianity needs to be more about what happens when you're alive than what happens when you're dead. But when we say things like, oh, God must have needed another angel, or when people say that, I do think that they're well-meaning. But I also think this, but they're actually trying to comfort themselves more than they are the other person. And so what do you do with that? Was that your question? What do you do with that?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, I have actually, in a funeral for a young person, said, people are going to tell you these kind of things. They mean well. My job is to protect you from well-meaning people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's you've said a lot of good stuff there.
I've got something to poke at them too,
yeah.
so don't worry.
No, I know. I'm trying to think how to go at this a little bit different direction. I'm thinking about the dying well, and who does it well.
I'm not even sure what that means.
I have used that phrase "dying well" with people before when I've talked about death. Not necessarily talking to people that are dying, but discussing the topic of death. And I think a commonality across this panel would be the first step is actually being able to face death. And you were kind of hinting at this by saying we focus so much on what happens after. I think dying well comes to accepting death. At its best, Christianity can give us an image of that. Jesus submits to death. That is, Jesus does not cling on to life. Rather, Jesus, in the name of peace, gives up life. But that's not the way our traditions have often wrestled with and depicted that happening. Now, if I think about it, though, from the damage side that Christianity can do, and you said, what do we do with that if religion mixed with death can be so damaging so often? I would only say that if you can't come to peace with death, any system of meaning making can become destructive. And so one of the things I think I've mentioned in this group before that one time I went to a transhumanist conference. And I remember one of the discussions there by one of the speakers was talking about how someday we're going to be able to live forever. They were certain that the technology was going to get us there and that there was going to be a day. And there was this strange, sad sense in my being that was like, you need to grapple with death too. Yeah, you need to be prepared that day might not come before you die. And they might be okay with that, I don't know. But I think a lot of people struggle with death. I think we live in a culture today that doesn't put us in touch with death much, except for medical people, sometimes counselors, and sometimes ministers. Most of us aren't around death. I get called to go to people's house to watch them die. Most people don't watch anybody die anymore except maybe their closest loved ones. That's not how it was throughout most of human history. People used to be much more in tune with what it meant to die. They understood the stages of dying. They understood what it looked like when people die, if they're dying naturally. We've lost a lot of that. And I think there's sort of a modern, postmodern, post-postmodern existentialist dread about death that can warp all of our tools. And it certainly can warp religion, but it can warp other tools as well. So I would only say that I think religion can be uniquely destructive because of the way it is almost embedded in many of our lives from a young age, so that it becomes this psychological structure and a faith structure and all of this. But I think any system can be that tries to promise you a way out of death can become destructive.
But you both still find value in that system, right? You both find meaning, you both find purpose in that religious kind of
I will
Yeah,
tell
please.
you a difference probably between what you've heard some people say and what I would say is that in death, rather than finding, what's the right way to put this? Rather than finding an answer or a comfort in my faith in God, I feel that I have grown more close to God as I have walked through death with people. The most profound experience of that for me was my younger daughter is a twin. But she and her sister were in utero and developed a thing called twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome very early on in the pregnancy. So my wife had to have intrauterine surgery, and then she was on bed rest for a while, and then she ruptured early. She was on bed rest another month in the hospital. The twins were born 3 months early, and they were both born alive, which was a miracle. But within a week, Annabelle's brain started to bleed, and they tried to put a shunt in, and it didn't do what it was supposed to do, and we had to make a decision. Do we keep trying to push and prolong life in a way that is not working, or do we let go? And so we decided to let go, and there was a moment in that hospital room that day where my wife and I held our little baby and removed her tube, and we watched her leave. And I don't know what happened in that moment, but I felt a profound sense of connectedness to life and to creation and to what I have experienced as God. And that continues to happen with me when I walk through death with people. And so I don't know that I always find comfort. Sometimes I'm angry, sometimes I'm hurt, sometimes I don't understand. But I also, in some strange way, am actually drawn closer to the divine. But that's just kind of a mystery to me. I don't try to explain that so much. But that's how I feel.
Yeah. And to kind of poke at you guys now, I mean, sure, I guess sometimes there's some harm. I guess that can happen, but it can happen anywhere. But I mean, at least the faithful have a system. I mean, you atheists, you non-religious folks, I mean, what do you even do? You just sit down and philosophize about this stuff?
Okay, a quick response, and then I'll say what I do. First of all, I'm so sorry. I mean, we're all here sharing very personal, real life things. Again, the individual thing, it's like, it doesn't matter. I'm sorry. I think that in the sake of the conversation, it's helpful maybe to zoom out a little from like, how does religion or not help an individual where you're like, whatever you need, take that. But how does this impact our society and our culture on a larger scale? So my issue with the connection between religion and death and suffering that we have as a society is because, in my perspective, because we have kind of evolved this as a tool to answer the suffering that we all deal with death, we are now beholden to everything else that comes with religion and that belief, in addition to, this is really helping me through the most painful thing in my life. And sometimes when we associate the comfort that that tool has brought us or other people, it means that, well, now we have to keep it around because what else can we do? And so while I would go easy on these guys' expression of religion, it seems very loving, I find that there is a lot of harm being done in religious groups that kind of sometimes ransom people to a belief, because what are we going to do when we die if we don't have this? And so it kind of works backwards. Like, we wanted this tool to help us deal with death, but now we have to keep this tool around because we can't deal with death without it. And so we can't edit religion, we can't question religion, and it kind of psychologically keeps us in this almost like being held hostage by a system of thinking, because all of us have to deal with death and suffering. And so the cultural, maybe an individual is ready, and I'll answer that, like how I deal with that, but like maybe one individual is ready to do that. And culturally, unless we get awareness out and help the conversation go on, I don't see groups of people having access to alternative solutions for their life and their meaning-making systems besides the harm that is packaged into some of the religions that we have. So, now to answer your question, how do you... Not well, first of all. I think everyone is lying if they say they figured death and suffering out.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah,
We were not going to give you an answer tonight.
Yeah, I will call your bluff, whether it's atheism or religion or anything. If you tell me that you are not afraid of death, that you don't want to suffer from being separated from your loved ones. Actually, I forgot I was going to say this. Does anyone know the 5 remembrances of Buddhism? New cancer, hold on, let me see if I can live bring this up.
You're of the nature to go.
Okay.
You're of the nature to die. You're of the nature to lose everything that is dear to you.
Those are the helpful ones, I think, for me in cancer. Like a spiritual group that says up front, you are of the nature to die, period. You are of the nature to be separated from everyone you love, period. And as a cancer survivor or whatever you want to call me, like, that brought me so much comfort. So talking about how I do it, just someone being honest. This is going to hurt and it sucks. We're sorry. And I'm with you. And so the peace that comes from saying the hard things and facing them, and just you can fall apart with that. You can be angry with that. Let the waves of anger and grief process through your body. Go to therapy, talk to a friend, go to a doctor, research all the options that are on the table in addition to or instead of I'm going to fall to my knees and beg God for my life, which I'm not saying that that's what you're promoting, but I'm saying I think that that can be the default response in religious contexts is what are we going to do about this? Or we're going to pray and God's going to save us. Or God is going to make a miracle happen and you're going to live. And I see the harm that can come from that platitude, keeping people from facing other or resourcing other tools that might be available to them, and sometimes just facing reality. Sometimes we can grow through being honest about these topics and not, I'm in support groups, and sometimes the people in the groups are like, God's got this, or I'm going to be fine, or we're going to be cured. And again, I'm not taking away anything from someone suffering. If that is what's functioning for you, great. I have found that a more brutally honest approach is better for me. And so those are my thoughts.
What do the secular...
Much to add.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
I kind of approach these sort of things through a lens of acceptance, which is very similar to what you're talking about. Like, don't look away and just kind of see certain things as inevitabilities, and to just process them beforehand, before it happens. Yeah.
So I would say that built within this is my take, right? That built within the DNA of Christianity is what you're talking about, this idea of you're going to suffer, you're going to die, and all of these things. But what's happened is somehow we've hijacked that message and made it more about that you won't.
Yeah.
But that's not actually the message. A friend of mine, and I can call him my friend now because we exchange emails and we've talked, Peter Rollins. I don't know if anybody knows Peter Rollins. But he and I and my friend Lucas, we had a conversation, and one of the things that he says is that he thinks that atheism and progressive Christianity have more in common with each other than progressive Christianity does with fundamentalism.
I agree.
And what he says is this. He says atheism is the intellectual assent to lack. Right? You don't know. Therefore, I'm not convinced. Right? That's what I understand it in a nutshell. Christianity is an attempt to live out lack. And I think that's beautiful. So for me, personally, the thought of suffering frightens me. I don't want to suffer. The thought of dying doesn't bother me at all. And it's not because I believe that there's a heaven. The jury's still out on that for me. because to be honest with you, lately what I have found very comforting is a memento mori, the Stoic position, which is simply, you remember you will die. And I think going back to what you were saying earlier, is we've created a culture where we pretend like that doesn't happen and we hide it. But the reality is, like I saw a chart, it was hilarious. It was talking about the average lifespan over like the course of humanity, and then at the top it said live forever, and of course no one has gotten there, and we won't. We're all going to die. The question becomes, and I think this is also built into the DNA of Christianity, especially the way I read Paul, is that yes, you're going to die. So what are you going to do now? One of the Stoic philosophers, who I can't remember, it might have been Aurelius. I don't know for sure about that, but he says, think what you're doing right now. Is that the thing you're going to miss when you die? And if it's not, then do something else. And so for me, when you talk about like dying, like how do we handle it? How do we do it? Like maybe we could all learn from that, because I think whether you're an atheist, you're a Christian, you're whatever the case may be, we probably spend way too much time sitting on our rear ends watching Netflix, when maybe we should be out doing something good. And the way I understand the Christian faith is that that's what actually they're talking about when they're talking about the kingdom of God or the reign of God, or it's this idea of bringing a presence well, a Stoic would have said it's the Zeus, right? Whatever, but sort of bringing that. But then again, that gets into my whole idea of what is God when I talk about God, and what do I think about when I die, and what is all. So anyway, but I don't want to ramble.
I want to go back to, because you challenged us a little bit to talk about the more macro picture, and how it affects culture. And I think you have a point there. I think you have a real point there. Now, of course, we're talking specifically about our culture, right? And we're talking as people in the United States in a particular culture. But I think
it's also important to say in this, so I grew up north and I grew up in Florida.
In the Southeast.
This culture is different.
Yes. In the Southeast, it's different, yes, I understand that too. But I think writ large across America, even though I think underneath, I will fight tooth and nail anybody that tells me we were founded as a Christian country. However, there are Christian impulses that run under a lot of our way of being, because so many of our founding people were Christian of some type. They were part of Christendom, right, exactly. And one of the big theological concepts that I think we have to understand, that maybe has been distorted in certain ways over time, is that Christianity, from the beginning, it is true that Christianity saw death as the enemy. So, the Christian story is about the fact that death ultimately doesn't win, right? That life wins out, and life wins out eternally. Now, what we tend to forget is that early Christians, growing out of Judaism, really believed death was real too, right? I mean, when they talked about the resurrection, like when we in our creeds say, I believe in the resurrection of the body in the Christian churches, if we say the creeds that have been around forever, a lot of people that haven't thought about them much think we're talking about Jesus. No, we're talking about the resurrection of everybody's body. That was classic Christian belief, was that death is real, we physically die, that's the end, and someday God will reconstitute everything and make things the way they should be. I can find hope in that message. I can. And it kind of resonates with me. But I also resonate with the idea that we really die, that death happens. And I think a lot of the disembodied spirituality, like I die and I've got a promise to love Jesus so my spirit can immediately depart and go and be with Jesus in heaven, I don't think that's very true to the tradition and very true to, and this is something I would never say to somebody that I was preparing a funeral for if that's what they thought. But I don't think it's very true to the tradition, and I don't think it's very true to our pure theology. However, it's the way a lot of people have thought always. And I think a lot of it is importation, too, of a lot of Greek thinking that affected the early church. This kind of duality of body and spirit, and that they have to be separated because the body defiles the spirit. I'm not sure. I mean, you can certainly take parts of the Bible and make a case for that, but I'm not sure that's the story of the Christian narrative as a whole or of theology. But it's the way a lot of people think. And we do suffer from this, as a culture, of being indoctrinated in this, what sometimes is called the Protestant work ethic, right? That we can work hard enough to do everything to shape our lives. We can even work hard enough to believe in God hard enough that we will be saved. And I find that a lot of times that manifests itself in people, even people that are not particularly religious in our culture, in this idea of fighting death to the very end. That death, instead of saying death happens and then someday God will save us, it's like, I'm going to stop death now. And we talk about, fighting cancer, fighting this, fighting that. And again, I do think there is there's a cultural disposition in our country to fight so hard against dying that it is damaging to us often. And that often takes up very malicious forms in certain kinds of theology. And this culture provides a great environment for that to take hold.
So you've all kind of touched on this a little bit. I think you were the one that actually said the term. And I'm gonna ask this question for everybody here in just a second. But before we go to that, I am gonna remind you guys that we have just a handful of minutes left before we go to the question and answer period. So I am positive you have a question about death or grief or suffering that you want to ask all of these people who are very up close and personal with that. So be thinking about those, you guys. So we're going to get right to that in just a second. But first, I'm hearing, you mentioned like a radical type of acceptance. You also touched on this a little bit with the 5 remembrances. You guys as well also are talking about how, hey, look, I think sometimes, the theology maybe is focusing on something we shouldn't be focusing on. So let me just ask it kind of bluntly. I mean, and we'll start there and we'll just go all the way down. I mean, are we really just doing this wrong? Have we just been doing this bad for a long time and we just actually need to start getting up close and personal, every single one of us, with death and grief and suffering? I mean, I think probably pretty much everybody here would probably say something similar to what you said, like, I don't want the suffering, I'm afraid of the suffering, I try to avoid the suffering, we're fighting death, we're fighting cancer, we're fighting all this. I mean, are we just really all doing it that wrong and we just need to really just get up close and personal?
I don't think there's a wrong way, but you could certainly do things better. We're so disconnected, like you said, from death and people dying unless you're in certain fields. I remember I used to watch a YouTube channel of a mortician, and a lot of times she talked about her field and how we, as a culture, are so removed from the entire process of dealing with a dead body and do the viewing, and you try to make them look like they're still alive and you dress them in their clothes, and how there are so many other ways that other cultures do death, where the family members and friends gather around the bed at the home and see them more in their natural state, and how it can help people process grief a lot better than that removal, and kind of it's almost like a cultural denial of death, how we deal with things, and then we put them in a little pine box and under the ground and put a little headstone, and there are other ways that we could do the whole death and grief process that
I think we could do better for sure.
Yeah, Jennifer, are we just doing this bad? Or are we just...
Well, for the sake of the conversation, yes, I am going to vote that we are doing it wrong.
I told you I'd get him fighting.
I do think that there is a lot of room for reflection and improvement on a cultural level about how we handle death. I think that, like, back to our country and the roots and how we got here and our inheritance and all of this, like, we have been put in a certain direction, a lot of us, because we've inherited certain ideas and beliefs. And while there's always a pro and a con to everything, I would say it would do us a service and our future generations a service to reevaluate what it's costing us to have a spiritual solution for the death problem that is exclusive, because I see the wake of harm that religion is, general, not everyone, but I'm seeing a path that is connected to the problem of death. And I think that religion is, there's an interplay there, that part of the reason that we are where we are with some of the ways that religion is having a negative effect is because of this death issue. And if we could uncouple that, we could have more choice, and we could give people a more rounded opportunity to grow and learn, and not a monopoly on death.
What do you guys think? Are we just doing it wrong this whole time? Does everybody out here need to be up close and personal with death more like you guys are?
I wouldn't want that for anyone. No, I've actually thought before, like, I could have lived a really fulfilling, I don't even know, fulfilling is a whole other topic we should talk about sometime. I could live a rich life and never be exposed to the amount of death that we get exposed to, and I would be happy. So I wouldn't go out and be like, you all need to find someone dying and hang out with them. It's hard. It's hard. But I do think as a culture, you mentioned art and pictures and stuff, and I was thinking about, like, you go back and you look at paintings and there was always a skull. Why? Because death is right there. You mentioned earlier about, there's tombs. I think this is really interesting. There's tombs in the top layer. It had two statues. I don't know if you've ever seen this. The top one is what they looked like in life, and the bottom one is what they have looked like as they have started to decompose. And it says on there, like, this is what you become. Like, and so I do think, again, memento mori, I think there's something to be said for that. I do think that we have spent so much within our culture trying to pretend like death doesn't happen when it's actually the one thing that we all have in common. And then as far as could we do it better, I want to talk specifically about my tradition, the tradition I'm a part of. I think we definitely could do it better. I think though, in my opinion, we have to begin to shift our emphasis on again, and I said it earlier, I'll say it again, on not about what happens after you die. Like, Christianity too often becomes all about what happens after you die, and then everything becomes about, well, you have been doing the right things? Have you been doing? And then even when we're trying to deal with death, we're not dealing with death. We're dealing with what's going to happen with them after the death, and we're actually trying to struggle with, well, what might happen to me when I'm in that place? And I want to know that I believed all the right things and I said all the right things, so that when I'm here, I can be assured, because right now I'm not really assured. And so I think that, again, as a culture, if we're willing to be more open about it within our faith, I think it would be helpful to talk more about how does an awareness of death help us live a life where, as Christians, we might say, to grow the reign of God, or just make the world a better place.
Well, I'm going to say yes, like everybody else, that we can do it better. But in the sake of conversation, I'll slightly fight with you.
Great.
I think one thing we have to remember when we attack religion as being a tool that is harmful is that religion itself is always enculturated. So there is no Christianity. I've said this before in these conversations. There are Christianities. There are many ways of being Christian, just like there are many ways of practicing other religious frameworks and faiths and traditions. And And I agree with you, and that's why I said earlier, I agree that a lot of what we've inherited in our culture currently is not very helpful towards dealing with it. So I think we could do a better job, those of us that are Christian and trying to help other Christians die well, to have a better way of doing that. And I also think we could do a better job of helping people that aren't Christian, who have grown up in this culture that's enculturated them that way, to let go of some of that angst or feeling of guilt or whatever else they bring to the table if that's affecting them as they face the point of death. However, at the same time, as a spiritual person, I've come to believe over the, there's been a trend for the last 30, 40 years for a lot of people to, if they sort of disconnect from religion, but they still kind of sense the divine in some way, they'll say, I'm spiritual but not religious. And I do believe you can be spiritual but not religious. But I think more truly, I think everybody sort of has a religion if they're spiritual. It may not be a framework religion that's given to them. It may not be. It may not be a framework. It may not be a given religion. But I think religion is putting your spirituality on the ground. And so, however you put your spirituality on the ground, you're doing that. And so, instead of saying, for me, instead of just saying, I think we need to pull religion out as a tool for those of us dealing with death, I think I would lean more towards saying we need to help people grapple spiritually with death as well. And how they do that practically in whatever way that means for them. But I think it's a little easy, a little straw man to just pin it on religion when I think it's really enculturated religion. So it's a broader, as you said, a broader cultural problem. There are Christians in other parts of the world that handle death very differently than we do. And they handle death in ways that we might think are a lot better than the way we do it. And they also consider themselves Christians, and they're part of the universal church that I claim to be a part of. And so I just think we have to remember that as well.
Well, yeah, I think you said it really well, and it's kind of what I was trying to hint at or say when I was talking about, like, kind of helping within our tradition understand it differently and do it better. But yeah, there's no doubt. In fact, we were having a conversation before we started out in the parking lot. You can't deny the impact that Christendom has had on Western civilization, but I also agree. I'm not a big proponent of the straw man argument.
Well, I'll just say for myself, I have really enjoyed this from all four of you. It sounds like we might have some future discussions we got to hash out, which I'm also a big fan of. I'll just end with a quick little story, because for a very long time now, when it comes to death, suffering, or grief, I have taken a page out of a handful of different people's books, one of which being a real-life man that Robin Williams once portrayed in a movie called Patch Adams. Dr. Patch Adams has been dealing with this stuff for his entire life. One of the biggest things he believed was that humor and levity were one of the most important things that we can bring to these types of conversations. I want to tell you a quick story about a friend of mine whose grandmother passed about 10, 15 years ago. When she passed, the entire family wasn't speaking to each other. And the executor, one of her sons, tried to get the whole family together, and nobody would do it, and everybody was angry, and everybody was fighting. And one day, he was finally able to get them all to sit around the dinner table. And they couldn't agree on anything. But the one thing that they could agree on was that this particular urn was exactly what Grandma would have wanted. It was the exact shape, it was the exact color pattern, everything, right? And so they all said, we're going to do it. We're going to go down there. We're going to get that one. So they all showed up at the funeral home, and they said, that's the one we want. And the funeral director went to the back, and he came back, and he said, so, bad news. We only have that. We make urns in two sizes, large and small. We only have that in the small size. The whole family sat there for a second, and finally one of the sons looked up and said, well, Mom was always kind of short, so just shove her in there. We'll take what we can get, you know? So whenever you find yourself in any of these really difficult moments, again, my suggestion for sure is try to have a little humor in it. But please give a massive round of applause to our 4 panelists tonight. Absolutely wonderful. And now we get to go to you guys. So that wonderful gentleman right there in that bright green shirt is going to walk around, raise your hand, and ask a question, okay? Don't ramble. Don't tell us your life story. We really appreciate it, and we definitely want to hear it after the Q&A section is done. So raise your hands, and Gary will find you.
Hi, thank you all. I heard all 4 of you say and or agree with you could do death better. And I didn't hear any examples of what that would look like or be. So could maybe one or both sides,
Whoever wants to
both of you, or at least one
Yeah,
from
so
each
for
side.
me, what I would mean by saying you could do death better, and again, that whole thing about better is interesting to me because I don't know exactly what we mean when we say better. But the way I understood the conversation tonight being better is that acknowledging and not trying to pretend as a culture that you're not going to die, to get to a point where we're not so afraid of it that we try to hide it, and that within the tradition, reframe it for it becoming about, well, it's going to happen to you because it happens to everyone. So what are you going to do with this time that you have to build the kingdom of God? That would be the way. That, to me, that would be a better way than what we're doing now.
Another better that I heard you mention that I so resonated with was, I think across the board, no matter what our systems of belief or non-belief are, that to always admit that we know about absolutely nothing about what it means to die and to be dead. And anyone that claims otherwise, I think, is a charlatan and is just speculating. And I find that to be harmful. And yet there are lots of religious people that will do that. But there may be other kinds of people, too, that will try to tell you they know what happens after you die. And or what it feels like to die, or any of that. The closest, the people that come closest to maybe being able to speak something to that are people that have these experiences where they pretty much die bodily and then they're resuscitated. I've had a few friends that have had those experiences, but even then, their experiences are radically different.
Yeah,
so even that doesn't tell you anything. But I think that it's a mystery. Well, actually, the friend I was thinking of said, I died. He was in a terrible motorcycle accident and almost died. And he said, there was nothing. Yeah. He said, I don't remember anything. I was just gone. You know, and he's a person of faith. His spouse is actually a United Methodist minister. But anyway, that it's absolute mystery. So not only that we believe that we die, but that we really know nothing about it. Other than that we all will go through it.
Some examples?
I'll throw kind of a tangential one in. One suggestion or one example would be treating life and death like within the natural system. So modeling to kids, like we all have a life cycle. Look at this plant. This plant is born, it has its life, and then it dies and it returns to the earth. So that is I'm not saying that should be everyone's model, but that's an example of a non-spiritual way of approaching death that is comforting. And when you use it in terms of like, and that's how the world continues to go, and kind of modeling for kids, kind of in opposed to the like, sort of like, not all Christians, but some people that say, well, we're going to fight death. Well, our solution is to eradicate death, and we make it this big, scary, terrible thing that we have to have Jesus to save us from. The alternative is, hey, we are all going to die, and it's a natural part of living and existing, and I'm okay and you're okay. Kind of like a comforting, maternal sort of take on it. It's just throwing it out.
That sounds real spiritual to me.
The divine feminine. I'm not against
Exactly. I'm down for the divine feminine. There we go.
That's
I love
another
it. I love
topic
it.
of conversation.
We need to talk the divine feminine sometime.
So I guess I could just build off of the memento mori type stuff and the acceptance of death as an inevitability, and it's kind of always there in the back of your mind, to kind of let that spur you instead of building the kingdom of God. It would be making the world a better place, because this is the only life that we know that we have. Yeah, that's what I would say.
And we could work together.
Exactly.
Awesome, wonderful. So, from a transhumanist perspective, right? Going a little technological here. So, for those that don't know, transhumanism is that death is currently inevitable, but one day, maybe through technology, it won't be, or it will be reversible even. What are your thoughts on that? I think from a faith perspective, you could probably dive into the soul and all that, not even talk about that, because that's a whole different can of worms. But from an ability to escape death through technology, what are your thoughts there?
Is that like is that
That's
like
a good
talking about
question.
like a transfer of consciousness?
Yeah.
Well, it can be. Yeah, it can be that, or it can be a slow evolution of the singularity where we just kind of merge into machines and we become something totally different.
Can I totally just, and this is, I'm not supposed to do this, I'm totally going to give my bias here. I'm all down for being a cyborg. Like tomorrow, like connect me to a computer. I'm into it, man. That's me. If you guys aren't,
You
whatever.
know what my response to that is? Resistance is futile.
Does no one follow Brian Johnson? Is no one following Brian? Do y'all know who I'm talking about? Brian Johnson is this like very wealthy guy. He sold Zelle or whatever, and now he thinks that with AI coming, that we are going to figure out how to extend human life indefinitely. And his whole motto is just don't die. And there's a funny documentary about him. If you want to get more content there, that was fascinating.
You know, I think there are a lot of, I think as somebody that is also interested in theology, there are, of course, a lot of theological implications there that also are attendant to, like, you know, I've heard a lot of people that study theology and put it in conversation with science that say, you know, if we escape the planet at all and start populating other places, what does it even mean to say God's made the world or saves the world? Or, you know, is our whole spiritual construct in, say, Christianity to, you know, person-centered and earth-centered, all that. But I don't want to go there. I think one of two things I think about a lot when I think about if that were even a possibility. One is, if we all live in some bodily form, it seems like, you know, I heard, who was it that I heard talking the other day, talking about death being a natural part of life, and said, you know, we just have to make room for other people. And I think about the fact that, I mean, can you imagine if some of our political leaders live forever? I mean, you know, that would not be a great thing. But then on top of that, I think about the fact that, okay, if we do, let's say the singularity comes, then we better figure out how to escape the planet fast so we can use this massive universe that God created or that exists out of nothing, because we're going to need a lot of places to land if we're living forever and ever. So I don't know. To me, it raises a lot of ethical and just moral concerns that, but I mean, you know, you could go down a million rabbit holes of that question. You could spend forever on that, I think.
I was just going to say, I think I might be in the minority here, but immortality sounds terrible, and I would like to rest someday, personally. I don't want to live forever. I'm good.
Yeah.
God created rest too. That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
If
Thank you.
that was my options, I think I would be
Found
with
my
you.
people.
I think it'll be a quick one, but we'll see where it goes. Anytime I'm in these conversations or I'm anticipating a conversation about death and dying in a religious context, To me, the first and most interesting part of that conversation is the afterlife. And it depends on what you believe, of course, but an afterlife that is going to be either reward or punishment. And it's amazing that in an hour it has barely come up. So not the discussion I expected. But my question is, for both sides, in the context of the afterlife, what are the harms and benefits of the afterlife belief in the context of dying and, if you're counseling people that are dying or dealing with death?
You should have been the moderator.
Y'all want to start, or
Yeah, do you guys?
Oh, of course, you give that one to us.
No, I can start if you want me to.
Go ahead. I got to think.
Okay. I mean, my first thought is probably we didn't talk about the afterlife as much because I don't know what your concept of afterlife is, but mine is probably not in line with a lot of what you're used to hearing out of a lot of Christians. Again, I tend to lean a little bit more on the tradition that says we really die, and that then my understanding of what Scripture tries to say is that God will reconstitute everything and make all things new. And so that I can't really fathom what that means or what that looks like, but that is something that happens beyond just me and beyond my finitude. However, I think if I'm dealing with people that are operating with what we normally think of as an afterlife idea, so that also let me say also, I don't come from a punitive understanding of salvation, but a lot of people do. So if somebody's dealing with the punitive idea of the afterlife, so either I'm eternally saved and my spirit goes to heaven, or I'm eternally damned, and they're wrestling with that, like I said earlier, that's one of the places that I actually would intervene theologically. I would want to help that person to the best of their abilities. And if we had to do it through the tools of their faith, we would go there. But I'd want to figure out some way to relieve them of the idea or the pressure that they have to save themselves. And one of the ways I would do that is, and this will probably be something I argue about a lot with the other Christians next week, is that I believe a lot of times, a lot of the ways we operate in a lot of Christendom is that we actually, it's funny, the people that charge Methodists with being works righteousness folk, that mean people that have to do good things to get to heaven or all that, and that's not what Methodists are at all. They're the ones who think you have to make a very specific assent to be saved. What I would help that person do is I would say, there is nothing you have to do to be saved. God, in my opinion, is the Savior of the world. And when I say the world, I really mean the Savior of all created things. And so you do not have to save yourself. And so I would help that person as best I could come to an understanding that there's another way to think about God and a way to think about being saved. And even if that means I tip them into thinking universally about salvation, because I'm not, that's a whole other theological conversation that I could probably get in with other Christians. Are we universally saved or not? In my way of thinking of the reconstitution of all things, I think all of creation is saved someday. But if I even operated out of that framework of I die and my spirit goes somewhere immediately, I'd rather somebody feel like a universalist than feel like they're beholden to a punishing God that is just waiting for them to make the mistake that then tips them into hell. Now, other people would tell you I'm apostate for saying that.
We'll find out next week. Do you guys have any?
Yeah, I have one quick thing. So right after I was diagnosed, I had a conversation with someone who's a pretty hardcore atheist. And she told me, I was kind of a blur, but in the context of the conversation, she was like, you know, when you die, that's it, right? Like to the ground and it's over and there's no afterlife. And I don't know what she was intending, but it was not helpful at the time, if anyone can guess. And I think that there's a little bit of ego and a presumption for anyone to assume that they have any idea what happens. How could any of us know what's going to happen? Is my perspective. And one of the things in my own journey of kind of reclaiming meaning-making systems that are not religious is that I like the idea of I don't know what it is, but I like the hope of that it will be that there is an afterlife and that there is a warm continuation of consciousness that I could potentially go on after this death, or that, I don't know, my particles will, anything. I try on different flavors of what I know. Maybe this makes me spiritual and not just like the hardcore data atheist where you're like, no, nothing. But I like to experiment with the idea of different things, and that really works for me. And I think that it is, I don't know, I think that none of us know. And so one of the things, though, that I felt like I reclaimed from religion was when I left, it felt like for some reason that I wasn't allowed to believe in an afterlife, because those were like, we get to do that. You know, if you stay here, then you get to believe in that. So I've kind of reclaimed that and talked to my kids about that. Little side note, we say that we're going to meet at gate 10, which is our religious roots from Revelation, because there's gates. We told them we're all going to gather at gate 10, so you can judge my parenting, but that's how we're handling that.
I knew you practiced religion. I knew it.
All right, we've got another one right over here.
I want to understand where the thought process that we're going to see when Grandma dies, and we all watch her go in the coffin and takes off, we're going to see her again, and we're going to hug her again. And that belief is rock solid in some of my friends. I don't know does anyone know where that started, where that came from, where that nurturing? And two, a second question, you can deal with both of them. How do you, when somebody comes up to you with something like that, like, you know, we're going to see Grandma, and you're like, I don't believe that at all. How do you not roll your eyes? What do you do? What can I do when somebody just pulls something that's like, whoa, that's out of nowhere. I don't know where that came from. Don't remember that in the Bible. But those two questions.
Yeah, so I think that it goes back to what Brandon was saying earlier about if it brings you comfort, and in that moment, I'm not going to challenge you on that. The thought, though, as we're talking, and with the last question too, it reminded me of a parable that I forget what gospel writer has Jesus saying it, and it may be in the synoptics where it comes up in a couple of them. But there's this parable, and it's about a rich man and a guy named Lazarus. And it's a parable, right? So it's not proof that there is a heaven or a hell. It's just a story, and it's a story that's being told in a tradition that whether you're Jewish, Gentile, like Greek, Roman, whatever, you're familiar with it. And it's this idea of the reversal of fortune. It's a reversal of fortune story. And what happens in that story is there is this interaction between Lazarus, like the rich man can see Lazarus, Lazarus can see the rich man. And so that might be some of that. I don't know for sure if that's where that comes from, right? But the other thing, too, that I find really interesting is parables are meant to challenge us, not to comfort us. And so a lot of times what happens is we say that we are the Lazarus in the story when we read it. And so we're going to be the recipients of all of this wonderful stuff. But I think what's happening here is Jesus is actually challenging us, whoever, the original hearers might be. And what he's saying is if you want to receive that reward, then you have to live the life of Lazarus. It's a reversal of fortune story, right? So you can't be the rich man and have the reward. And I think there's also this challenge, though, of if you are sitting here today and you're thrilled that the rich man is finally getting his comeuppance, you need to check yourself too. Because if you're truly a person who professes to be about this love, then you should not want anyone to experience suffering. And so to me, that's sort of how that plays out in the parable of Jesus. And then I'm not going to get into what I actually believe.
Actually, I was thinking too, you mentioned a scriptural reference that could give credence to that or could make some people feel that way. One of the ones I thought of that's very concrete that I was thinking about this discussion coming up is, and I think some people would read it that way, that, oh, these two end up in heaven, is actually when Jesus looks at the one criminal that he's dying next to and says, today you will be with me in paradise, right? Now, I don't think that's rightly understood that way, as like in 10 minutes our spirits are going to be dancing together in the presence of God on golden streets. That's not what I actually think. But I mean, I can see how you could take certain aspects of that kind of thing and be like, oh, well, if we die and we go to heaven, then everybody's there. Everybody that's supposed to be there anyway, right? And that's the thing that always gets me is people that believe that you have to like put your faith in God to get to heaven and see your loved one. They're always sure that the people they know got there, which is really interesting to me. Almost always, anyway.
Yeah, I was about to say, if you're a Calvinist, it's only what 1 out of 4.
Right.
So if you're in a family of 4, somebody's screwed. So I also think this, and it goes back to what we were talking earlier about the cultural influence, right? So for example, what we know about hell, we actually get more from Dante than we do from Scripture.
Yep.
And then Dante influences our movies. And so our picture of hell is actually created more by the culture than it would be than by the Scriptures are. And I also think then that gets put into our songs, because I also think that a lot of the songs we sing in churches on Sunday mornings theologically are really, really bad. But one of them is, when we all get to heaven, what a great... I think that's an example of what you're talking about, and so that becomes a theological song based on some place where we got that from. Another one that's really bad is Onward, Christian Soldier.
However, I do want to say that I do think that there's sort of a, and this is my spiritual side talking, I do think there's sort of a human impulse to at least hope that we are together someday again. And I think that's part of where it comes from too. And I do believe in some way I will be united with those that have gone before me. I just don't think of it in as concrete of terms as people think about it. I think of it more mysteriously than that. I don't claim to even understand what that means. But I feel that impulse, and that impulse feels right to me. And I guess that's what you would say is a step of faith. I don't know.
I have a real quick note on that. One thing I pick up on what you're asking, and maybe I'm hearing it wrong, is a lot of times there's a lot of assumptions made that everyone believes the same way, especially in the South, that when someone dies, that everyone thinks the same thing. And so if you don't think or feel that way, it can feel really isolating when those assumptions are made or those platitudes are given. So they may have no idea, but if you're carrying around a divergent view from the majority of the culture around you, you know it all the time, right? I feel it all the time. You're waiting for a conversation to break down in a point where the other person realizes that you don't believe the right way, and you see their eyes change, right? There's some feelings about that, right? If that is you. So when someone that you love or whatever, and it's a conversation, and they make that assumption, it can be hurtful. And so I think that for me, knowing how to have compassion for the other person that is needing their system in that moment. If grandma died, of course, like we're going to spread around the understanding to everyone. But also sometimes for me, it means vocalizing my own identity and saying, hey, I get that. That's not really how I see it. I'd love to talk about it with you if you want. And that's helpful for me because the cultural feeling of you're not allowed to have a voice in the room, also why I've loved having this microphone, thank you, is like it's healing to be able to say like, hey, I'm different and you can have a problem with it if you want, but like that's okay. So kind of a twist on that question.
I mean, when you ask, like, how do I keep from rolling my eyes? Not easily. not very easily. I just kind of say, like, well, I'm really glad that brings you comfort. You know, that's really all I can say. I mean, I think about just like working with clients. I do psychological assessments, so these are kind of like semi-brief interactions that I have with people. And people will kind of say stuff in passing. I'm like, oh, okay. Okay, so next question, you know. So that's just, you know, that's how I deal with it personally.
All right, we've got one more over here.
Okay, I see just a few hands back there. After this question, I'm going to say, whoever doesn't raise their hand on the next round, you don't get to ask a question because we're getting close. We're going long. This has been a great session. So go ahead and we'll see who's left.
Pascal's wager. How many people do you think are religious because they feel it's a better bet to bet on something that's not for sure than to take a chance that maybe it is real?
Yeah, fire insurance.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd be willing to bet that there's quite a few people that it's fire insurance. You know, we used to, 20 years ago when I first did a career change and got into this, my wife used to tell me, don't let anybody join the church anymore. Because the moment they join the church, they stop coming. Because what happens is you move into town, you get your water hooked up, you get your electricity hooked up, you get your cable set up, you find out, you know, you get all the things, and then you find your church, you got your church, so you know that any weddings, any funerals that are coming up, you're covered, you're good, and that's it. And then we never see you again. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for that.
All right, we've got one more back here in the back corner.
Hi, I just wanted to respond to something that I heard, and I actually really appreciated. Jeff, I believe you were the one that pointed it out, but you just observed, I think, very accurately that there seems to be a lot of compatibility and commonality in terms of not only where you guys are at with the way you approach this very important topic, but also amongst each other. And I think you're spot on. And I've never really quite heard it put that way, but I think you're onto something. And I think not only does it speak to the quality of, or just how commendable the journeys that people are respectively on, because I know my community and the atheist community hasn't been in this type of a space very much. And I think it also speaks a lot to what you guys are doing here at Conversation Coalition, because I got to say tonight was incredibly refreshing. Don't get me wrong, I'm going to be here next week when you guys mix it up with the other folks, but in the meantime, it's really given me, I guess, really a lot of hope, and I just wanted to thank you for that.
Thank you. I'm not on the panel next week because they've all decided that I'm not one.
No, he's the truest. He's the truest. That's the... Real quick, everybody, if you want to ask a question.
Quarter Christian. You're quarter Christian.
I'm quarter.
Throw the hand. Okay, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. I see right there, and we're cutting it off.
Okay, we'll cut it off there. This goes back to if it gives you comfort. But, you know, I've been at a funeral where a family member has been there, the death of a father, the death of a mother, the death of a daughter who has been heinously murdered in an abusive relationship, and I didn't see a tear in any of those 3 occasions. Is it possible that sometimes, if it gives you comfort, is really not facing the fact that grief has to be borne and worked through? My question.
It's possible. I will say, I love watching crime shows, you know, and it always drives me nuts because they always think the person's guilty because they don't act the way they should when something happens. I don't presume to know how people are grieving from when I see them at one event. So for all I know, those people are very much processing their grief, and maybe that's why they're, you know, I don't know. But I certainly think religious belief could be used as a way to escape dealing with what you were feeling.
religious views are fairly fundamental in this situation.
Oh yeah, and yes, and I think that could very well be the case. But also, again, for some people, those views may really help them process death. Some of them, not all of them. And I know that's hard for some of us to believe, but it may be true.
I do agree that in the fundamentalist expression of Christianity, that I do think that grief is shut down sometimes. It's my experience that we hear something like, "Don't cry there with Jesus," and that's where someone's robbed of a birthright of grief, because the religion, we have to honor like the belief that they're okay. Like it's more important that we fall in line to the theology than we have our natural human thing. And again, like agree that that's a version of Christianity.
Yeah. So my niece, she and my daughter were the exact same age, and she died at 6 years old. They brain tumor, and by the time they found it, it was already the size of a grapefruit. And I watched my brother and my sister-in-law process it completely different. Both committed Roman Catholics. And he was furious with God, just furious. And we talked about it, and I was like, yeah, you should be, like, absolutely. My sister-in-law still signs cards to us and signs Angel Abbey. And she's never dealt with it. And we're just kind of waiting for her to all of a sudden just lose it. And it's caused a lot of stress in their marriage over the years too. Yeah.
I do want to say though that I think if we don't honor where people are, then we can do that with religion, and we can do it with other things too. So like my experience that I spoke of earlier, my spouse is a very private person and also does not like to process things with lots of people. And the number of people that try to coerce her into being part of therapy groups or counseling sessions, not religious things, other kinds of tools, and she was like, I do not want that, and I do not need that. And I had to tell people, look, I know you think it's weird, but I know this person. They deal with grief in a different way, and you need to honor it. And so, again, it's about meeting people where they are. And if we can't do that, as religious or non-religious people, we can cause harm.
All right, we got two more. I'm going to go right here and then get you in the front.
Sorry, what's your name in the hat again?
Jennifer.
Jennifer. I really enjoyed hearing what you're saying about what you liked to believe would happen after death. As a non-believer, I hold kind of a similar stance, or I'm open to all the possibilities. And I like to believe a couple different things. But so I'm just curious, you've already said what you would like to believe. What the rest of you, what is your personal belief, or at least your best case scenario? Like, what do you believe is going to happen after you die? Or if you don't feel like you really know, what's your best case scenario?
Oh, I have one thing, even though I already did it. Okay, I'll tell you it's kind of funny, but I just did a bone marrow biopsy to follow up from my stem cell transplant, and you can do it without any sedation, or you can say, I'd like the sedation, and so they give you propofol. And so they put propofol in an IV. This is what Michael Jackson died of. It's like a sedative drug, and it puts you to sleep. But when you fall asleep, it's like the most warm, comforting relaxation feeling. And when you wake up, it's the same feeling. I mean, I am not like a smoker, drug user, don't really drink, but like it was the best feeling. And so I woke up from that procedure saying, if that is what dying actually feels like, just that like comforting black, it's over, that's best case, or something else, that's best case. So maybe propofol laced would be my preference.
Just want to say real quick, we do not advocate the use of any.
It was a cancer procedure.
Yeah, no. That's medical. That's fair. Yeah. Anybody else? What best case scenario?
The best sleep I ever got was during a colonoscopy. So it's like just out. Just out. So woke up. I was like, wow, that feels great. If that had been death, if I'd never come back, it would have been fine. So are you asking what would be best about the death experience or the after? Because you were
Afterlife.
talking about the after, right? Well, okay. I'm still playing with mine and trying to figure out what I think. I think I will be my whole life. However, I am really intrigued by the thinking of a lot of folks today that are putting a lot of the things that we think we know through science in conversation with a lot of the ways that religious people have talked about imagining death and imagining going on. And so when I talk about the fact that I think we really die, but that I hope that in some strange way we are reconstituted into something better, I hope that the love of God, and this is going to get real woo-woo, but I hope that there's a theologian I love right now, comes from the Wesleyan line of thinking. So John Wesley was the founder of Methodism. But actually, this guy is a Nazarene, and he's not a Nazarene anymore because he's been excommunicated because they thought he got too out of bounds. But he's kind of becoming the foremost theologian of love. His name is Thomas J. Oord. And he is trying to help people reconstruct a way of thinking. He admits that you can never say everything there is to say about God, but he says we've done so much deconstructing and we haven't tried to reconstruct a better image of God. And so he always starts with God's love, and he's kind of come to this notion of if God is truly love, then God has to be all uncontrolling. And so what he's actually done theologically, he's thrown out the idea of omnipotence. And he says that God is not omnipotent, that there are certain things God cannot do. And Scripture often says there are things God cannot do because of God's nature. And he says God is fully love, and so therefore he talks about omnipotence instead. And he believes that God's presence is trying to woo a better state out of everything. And that not only are we in our minds or our hearts trying to reach toward what is better, but that also God is trying to woo all of creation to cooperate. And that's how he plays around with ideas of theodicy, which is like, why do bad things happen, especially why do bad things happen to good people, all this stuff. He's like, because God is spirit and God actually can't control the physical world, but God is a presence within all things that is wooing a better state of things. And so my hope is that someday God's work will be done. I don't know what that means, but I think I'll die before that happens. What was the name? Thomas J. Oord, O-O-R-D.
Text that to me, Michael. All right.
All right. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't know. To be like, I fully embrace uncertainty with most of my life. That being said, what would be the ideal that I could hope for? Well, first, I think it's directly, like Brandon was saying, it's directly connected to what my idea of God would be. I also start getting accused of not being a Christian when it comes out that I'm a Christian universalist. And so I cannot reconcile eternal damnation with a loving God. I wouldn't do that to my own children. Why would I think that love would do that? I also, though, don't think of God in terms of being as far as object. God is subject. And I believe that there is this, and you call me a Jedi Christian, but I do believe that there's like this, I think that there's this creative, loving energy that runs through all things and from which all things have their origin. And that's about the closest I can get to describing God. And if anybody can go further than that, then they're not talking about God anymore. And if I go further than that, I'm not talking about God anymore. I'm talking about some kind of mental construct. And sharing with you right now, I'm actually just sharing a mental construct. I'm not really even sure what that means. Okay? That being said, I think that the best I could, like in my mind with all of that, maybe it's a reuniting with that at the end. We all reunite with that. And what that looks like, I don't know. I really don't want to have my eternal consciousness that I have now. That would bring along with it hell. Eternal memory would be hell. So I don't think it's that. I don't know what it is, though.
I just want to say, kind of sounded like Obi-Wan and the Force, right, y'all? I'm just saying, a little bit Jedi there.
Just midichlorian count is pretty high.
Sarah, you had...
So I've kind of touched on this a little bit in some of my other answers, but I guess best case scenario for me would be like a really profound and satisfying rest, just like feeling of rest. But what I believe is it's more like it's before you were born. It's the same. You just don't exist. You're just not there, and you're out, and that's it. So pretty simple.
All right, we've got another one up front, and then I'll let you tell me where the one in the back is.
I would be okay with that. I don't really know how to put this, but I've got a colleague that I'm working with who grew up in a Catholic tradition and is very fatalistic, and he's currently battling terminal cancer. And this has led him, he's pursuing treatment, but it's led him to almost succumb to a fatalistic outcome. And I know we talk a lot about like meeting people where they are, and that's how we respond to that. But when somebody like that who's used to a fatalistic worldview is wrestling with this kind of thing themselves, and they hear us talk about something that I agree with, which is having a better acceptance of death as a part of life and just accepting it as a part of life. What do you say to somebody like that to stop the pendulum from swinging too far in that direction and giving into, well, yeah, it's part of life, so why should I do anything? Why should I fight? Why should I push back against that darkness?
If I may sum it up and just kind of give me a little bit of a nod or a shake here, but kind of like what prevents people from kind of stepping into that nihilism or depression or just kind of letting the grief and the suffering kind of take hold? Yeah, what do you do from a non-religious or secular side, from a Christian, from a religious perspective? I'm so glad you guys have to answer that, by the way.
I mean, first and foremost, I think religion at its best, or just spirituality at its best, never separates from being rooted in paradox, that you have to hold a both end. And so what I would hope to help somebody here that's getting fatalistic is that death is a part of, what did you say? It's a part of life, right? Death is not an escape from life. It's a part of life. It's a part of living. And even the experience of death and the experience of dying. Some of us die very quickly. Some of us die agonizingly slowly, and everything in between. And most of us hope for the quickie, that's right. But whereas I don't want to valorize suffering, just to say suffering's good for suffering's sake, but I do think we see that people's lives have meaning, and people's encounters with others mean something even until they succumb to death. And so that there is always something good about being alive. But that doesn't mean you have to be alive forever. But it also means that just because death is a part of life doesn't mean we should be ready to shake off one half of the paradox.
I would also want to know, like, is he finding comfort in it?
Yeah.
Two quick things on that, which is if it's a cancer patient and they have terminal, is that what you said? A terminal cancer? So if you, there's a plethora of ways I think that people approach a terminal cancer diagnosis, and some of them are, I want to fight, I want to live, and some of them are, it's better for me to be done and come to terms with that. And I think that honoring individual autonomy and like what, even if it's based off of a fatalistic meaning-making system, like it's a difficult position if you want something more than they do, and having a place to talk that out is helpful. But in addition, I'll say this, like, and not in a terminal cancer patient situation, but it is, I observe, a problem for people who are religious and then not. To go from a meaning-making system that's answering all these things into, I don't know anything. I don't have any idea what this is. What is the point? And I don't know what it would be like being raised kind of secularly, but that jump is, to me, can be a very risky time for someone psychologically. Anxiety, depression, being untethered from reality and grounding and the resources and the community. And it is a ride. And so I don't know, like, I don't have like a solution, but to say that, like, not to be up here on platform, that is a gentle thing. I think that in between, I think there's a soft place to land and there are secular resources, but that transition can be very difficult, especially if you get kind of stuck in a nihilistic place. And I have listened to a lot of people talk about like solutions for that, and I think there are some for people. Britt Hartley is someone I follow that's a secular spiritual director or something, and she has a whole course on like dealing with nihilism. But I think it's a valid question. So
I don't really have much of an answer. I mean, as far as nihilism is concerned, like, it's kind of a duality, right? It's like a paradox. Sometimes I let the pendulum swing myself. I mean, I'll be the first to admit that. And it's kind of like, oh, so this is all that there is, and we're just here, and we die, and that's it. And then other days it's like, well, this is all that there is, and we're here, and we're gonna die, and that's it. You know, so it really depends on your kind of take on things, your temperament, and, you know, what's going on in your life, and, you know, so that's just my own personal experience with it. Yeah.
All right, we've got one more back here in the corner.
And as Gary gets over there real quick, I am just going to remind you wonderful people that literally 7 days from now, in 1 week, we will be right back here, same time, same awesome place. We will be having another Conversation Coalition event, just back to back. So if you have enjoyed this one, please tell your friends, tell your family, just meet a stranger and bring them. So, close us up. What's this last question for?
Yeah, this is for the whole group. About 7 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I was watching Channel 4, the regular Channel 4 news, about a couple, either in Mount Juliet or Lebanon. It was right out here. She's written a book about it. The husband died, but before he died, they were Christian, devout, and she said, try to send me a message after you die. Okay, he had two doctors, a black guy who was an oncologist, a white guy who was, I think, a neurologist, and he's on the staff at Vanderbilt also. The oncologist said the day these guys didn't know each other, even though they had the same patient. The day he died, the oncologist didn't know it yet. He was in his bedroom that night. He heard the guy behind, the guy who had died, he heard him call his name behind him. He said, before I even turned around, I knew who it was because I recognized his voice. And he said, will you send this message, this fax to my wife? And he said, yes. He didn't say what it was, though. The white guy, the guy at Vanderbilt, neurologist, he said the next evening he still didn't know this guy had died. He was sitting in his, I think, dinner living room right after supper, and a bright light appeared in front of him. And then this guy was standing in the middle of that. He said the same thing. Would you fax this whatever to my wife? And he didn't say what the message was either. How many of y'all heard? Any of y'all heard of that? Do y'all believe that stuff happens? Okay, so y'all think both these doctors just kind of made this up? I mean,
Yeah. What do y'all think on that?
The only thing I would say, I don't know anything about the veracity of that story. I will say I think that there are ways that we are connected that we don't always understand. And I don't know if that is through our physiology, if that's through spirit. I don't know what it is. But I do know that we are, I used to have there was a woman that went to a church I worked at, and she was very spiritual. And she used to lead us in meditative practices. And she talked about the fact that our heart radiates electricity for about 5 feet. And so if you get within somebody else's presence, you're in their field, and so we literally, and I think about the fact that since I already mentioned my daughters, I'll tell you that when we knew we were going to have to let Annabelle go, both of, talking about twins are kind of strange that way, connected in strange ways that we don't understand. Both of their vital signs were through the roof. It looked like they were both dying. And the doctor said, we don't know what's going on, but we're pretty sure that Miriam's having sympathetic reaction to what she's experiencing in the incubator next to her. They weren't connected or anyway. It was just they're in the same room. As soon as we made the decision to remove life support from Annabelle and then started that process, Miriam started to regulate. And by the time Annabelle was gone, Miriam was back to normal. Now, I don't know how that happens. It's inexplicable. But I do think there are ways that we are connected to one another that sometimes we don't understand. And I don't know, again, if that's spirit, physiology, I don't know what it is. But I do think we all have to open ourselves to a little bit of mystery and wondering about things.
Thoughts on that, you guys, before we wrap up?
I find that to a kind of a bummer. I'm sort of like a real skeptical, science, rational person, because sometimes I see like supernatural explanations being connected to beliefs that are harmful or like assumptions being made. And I feel like sometimes in like general public, like there's not a lot of awareness about like confirmation bias and like some of the reasons that sometimes we think things, or sometimes people with bad intentions who are trying to, trick people and people believe stuff. So the gullibility factor. So I have a part of me that is a continued skeptic. I will always push for like an explanation. But to your glee, I also have a part of me that does like wonder and awe and to imagine the what if. And so I kind of wrestle with that internally between the two of like, I don't want to believe anything or take it again. I don't want to be tricked. And I like to kind of be in the magical realm sometimes. So kind of both ways for me.
Well, I hate to have to do it, but unfortunately, I know you and Jordan want to go home at some point. Yeah, good news is, once again, literally 7 days, we will be right back here. Folks, there are these cute little laminated cards on some of these tables, okay? QR codes, please connect with us online. Get our newsletter, and you can learn about all the fantastic times that we are gathering together. I know we're going to have all four of you back because this was absolutely wonderful. So please give them another big round of applause. And then we can all get out of here. Thank you guys so much. Again, next week, right here, come hang out with us.